I always thought living in a gated community meant peace of mind. You know, neatly trimmed lawns, quiet neighbors, HOA emails about grass height and mailbox standards. That's what I signed up for, or at least, that's what I thought I signed up for. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to discover. It all started on a Monday morning, when the sun hit my driveway just right and my neighbor's sprinkler sprayed my freshly waxed car. Classic suburban chaos. I was sipping coffee on my porch, enjoying the sweet illusion of normalcy, when I noticed something odd. Two of the HOA guards standing near my garage, looking suspicious. Not watching the neighborhood suspicious, more like, why is there a retired cop with guns in this house? Suspicious. I squinted. One guard was fiddling with his keys, jingling them like he was auditioning for a bad heist movie. The other kept glancing toward the street, checking if anyone was watching. I immediately felt a shiver. I'd spent 20 years as a cop learning to spot trouble before it hit. And this was trouble. Maybe they're just doing a new neighborhood patrol, I muttered to myself, trying to calm the little knot of anxiety forming in my chest. But something told me otherwise. My gut, trained over decades to smell danger, was screaming louder than a police siren. I decided to do a little reconnaissance. I grabbed my binoculars and hid behind the thick hedge lining my property. I had a perfect view of the garage. I sipped my coffee slowly, trying not to look too eager. But inside, my mind was racing. Then I saw it. One guard pulled open the side door of my garage, just a crack, and reached inside. My heart stopped. That crack, that tiny opening, was enough for me to see my gun cases. Gone, I froze. My guns, the ones I had legally owned and meticulously maintained, were being stolen by the HOA guards. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. But no, there it was, the guard's arms sliding my gun cases into a large, suspicious-looking duffel bag. My mind raced faster than a getaway car. Are they seriously doing this? I whispered under my breath. HOA theft, really? Humor tried to sneak in. I imagined a headline. Local HOA guards arrested for armed robbery, former cop saves the day. But laughter quickly died in my throat when I realized the stakes. These guys didn't know I was a former cop. They didn't know I could track, outsmart, and outmaneuver them before the situation even escalated. I backed up, slipped into the house, and quietly checked my security cameras. Every door, every angle, every hidden corner, I had footage of them moving like professional thieves. My heart pounded, not with fear but with adrenaline. I hadn't felt this alive in years. I paced the living room, trying to think fast. Should I call the police? No, they'd never believe an HOA guard could steal guns in broad daylight. No, I needed evidence. Proof, something undeniable. I grabbed my old cop gear, flashlight, gloves, and my own set of handcuffs just in case. As night fell, I positioned myself near the garage, hidden in shadows, my camera ready. I watched and waited, heart hammering. And then, just as I predicted, they came back. Two shadows moving like vultures toward my garage. They had no idea what was coming. And then, in a move that would seal the night in my memory forever, one of the guards glanced directly toward the hedge, and I realized they were just inches away from discovering me. I held my breath, gripping the camera. One wrong move and everything could explode. But I wasn't about to let my guns or my peace of mind walk out that garage. And that's when I saw it. The guard pulled a lockpick from his pocket and the door clicked open. That tiny sound was louder than a gunshot in my ears. My pulse skyrocketed. I knew the game had just begun. And little did they know, the former cop in the bushes had a plan, and payback was about to start. The guard is about to grab the guns. Will I act before they vanish with my property? I froze behind the hedge, barely breathing, as the guard's hand hovered over my gun cases. Every muscle in my body screamed action, but I knew I couldn't rush it. Years on the force had taught me one thing: patience beats panic every single time. And right now, patience meant watching, recording, and making sure I caught them red-handed. I slowly raised my camera, fingers trembling not from fear but from anticipation. The night was quiet, eerily so. The only sound was the faint hum of a streetlight above and the soft shuffle of the guard's boots against the driveway. He bent down, lifting one of the cases, and my stomach dropped. This wasn't just petty theft. These guys were bold, stupid, and underestimating me in ways that would soon cost them dearly. I smirked to myself. You're about to find out why ex-cops don't retire quietly. I leaned closer, careful to stay hidden, and started whispering sarcastically under my breath. Hey, nice choice of duffel bag. Is this your special edition HOA robbery kit? Of course, the guard couldn't hear me, but it helped keep my nerves steady. Humor is a lifesaver in tense situations. The second guard appeared from the side, carrying a clipboard like some kind of office drone. I blinked. A clipboard? Really? These guys were ridiculous. But what they lacked in subtlety, they made up for in arrogance. They clearly thought no one was watching. And that's when I realized they had no idea they were dealing with a former cop who spent decades training for situations like this. I shifted slightly, snapping pictures silently with my phone. Every angle, every movement, every nervous glance. They were documenting themselves perfectly, unknowingly, and I had it all. Then came the moment that made my blood run cold. One of them pulled a small bag out of his jacket, a lockpick set. My heart jumped. They weren't just stealing, they were professionals, at least in their own deluded minds. And my guns were only seconds away from leaving my property. I bit my lip, thinking fast. I couldn't risk them getting away tonight. But I also couldn't just charge out there. This wasn't a movie, and I wasn't about to end up on a local news blooper reel. No, I needed a plan. I ducked lower, crouching in the shadows, and remembered a trick from my SWAT days. If you can control the environment, you control the game. I glanced around my garage and the surrounding yard, noting every blind spot, every escape route. Then it hit me, the motion sensor lights. If I triggered them at the right moment, it would blind them, give me cover, and bonus, I'd freak them out enough to make mistakes. Minutes felt like hours. The guards were fumbling, chatting quietly about getting this over with, oblivious to the storm brewing behind the hedge. I suppressed a laugh. They really thought this was going to be an easy night. And then, the first spark of action. A guard bent down, pulling one gun case closer to the edge of the driveway. That's when I saw it, the glint of metal under the streetlight. My pulse hammered in my ears. This was it. My moment to step in. I reached for the motion sensor remote I'd rigged earlier. One flick of the switch, and the lights would flare. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer thrill of knowing the next seconds would change everything. Just as my finger hovered over the button, I froze. Another shadow, slimmer, taller, appeared behind them. My stomach knotted. Had I miscalculated? Was this a neighbor or something worse? The taller figure leaned over, whispering something the guards didn't hear. But whatever was said made the first guard stop, glance around nervously, and tighten his grip on my gun case. Time slowed. I knew one false move and they'd vanish into the night with my guns. But I also knew that if I acted perfectly, just perfectly, I could catch them, stop them, and expose the HOA's corruption in one clean move. And that's when I pressed the button. The garage erupted in bright, blinding light, reflecting off the metal of the cases. The guards yelped, stumbled backward, and in that split second I saw my chance. My years of training kicked in, and I moved faster than I'd moved in years. But just as I lunged toward them, something unexpected happened. One of the guards spun around, and I locked eyes with him. For a brief second, recognition flashed across his face, panic, fear, maybe even respect. And then, before I could react, he did something that made my blood run cold. One guard disappeared into the shadows with my gun case. I'm left holding the light, knowing part of my arsenal is already gone. How did he escape so fast, and where is he heading? The moment the guard disappeared into the shadows with my gun case, my heart leapt into my throat. My adrenaline surged, muscles tensing like coiled springs. This wasn't some slow-motion movie stunt. I had seconds to decide my next move, or my guns would vanish forever. I cursed under my breath. Of course, the one night I'm patient, they choose to make a run for it. My hand tightened around the flashlight, my eyes scanning the yard. I could barely see the guard's silhouette against the darkened street, but I knew his steps, light, hurried, careful, like someone who knew what they were stealing was dangerous. I bolted, moving faster than I had in years. Years of cop training kicked in, reflexes sharpening, senses firing on all cylinders. I hugged the shadows, ducked behind bushes, and navigated the driveway with precision. Each step was calculated. I didn't want to spook him, yet I couldn't let him escape. The night was alive with sound. Leaves rustled underfoot. A distant dog barked. My own breathing sounded like a bass drum in my ears. Somewhere nearby, the other guard had frozen, unsure what to do, blinded by the lights I had triggered earlier. I used that to my advantage. One step at a time, I closed the distance. I kept muttering sarcastically, partly to keep calm, partly because humor keeps fear at bay. Really? You're running from an old cop with a flashlight. This isn't a video game. Oh wait, it is now for you. Suddenly, he ducked into the alleyway between my house and the neighbor. Perfect. Tight spaces, my specialty. I slowed, moving silently, blending into the shadows. My mind raced, recalling every chase tactic I'd learned on the force. Approach from the flank. Cut off escape routes. Don't underestimate them, but also don't underestimate myself. As I rounded the corner, I saw him, half hidden by the fence, the gun case clutched tightly against his chest. His breathing was ragged, panicked. And that's when I noticed something odd. He kept looking over his shoulder, like someone was coming to meet him. I froze, sensing the setup. HOA guards weren't usually smart, but desperation can make anyone reckless. And that's exactly what I planned to exploit. I tapped my earpiece, yes, I had one, left over from my cop days, and whispered to myself like a field operative, time to play a little mind game. I tossed a small rock down the alley. It clattered against the fence, echoing like a gunshot. The guard spun around, startled. That's all I needed. I charged, feet pounding, tackling him mid-step. The gun case hit the ground with a loud thud. He scrambled, trying to push me off, but I pinned him to the ground. Hands where I can see them, I barked, every word sharp, commanding, leaving no room for negotiation. He froze for a moment, wide-eyed. And then, in a flash, I realized he wasn't alone. A second shadow emerged from behind the fence, a backup guard, coming to rescue his partner. My pulse spiked. This was turning into a full-blown confrontation. I muttered under my breath, half sarcastic, half serious. Great, just like old times. 2 against 1, oh wait, I've done this hundreds of times before. I grabbed the gun case with one hand and pushed the first guard toward the wall, keeping the second one at bay with a swift kick. The guards exchanged panicked glances. They hadn't expected a former cop to anticipate every move. I smirked, confidence is contagious, and fear spreads faster than any virus. The first guard tried to bolt again, but I yanked the case, twisting his arm just enough to make him stumble. He went down hard, and I didn't even flinch. Years of training had conditioned me to stay calm under pressure, even when adrenaline had me buzzing like a live wire. But just when I thought I had control, the second guard made a desperate move. He lunged at me with a wild swing, probably thinking sheer aggression would intimidate me. I sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and used his momentum to throw him into the fence. Both guards were down, breathing hard, wide-eyed, and fully aware that the old cop in the bushes was more than just a retired neighbor with a flashlight. I stood over them, chest heaving, adrenaline still coursing, and felt that familiar, exhilarating rush. Control, power, and the satisfaction of justice in my hands. And yet I couldn't relax. Something told me this wasn't over. The other HOA guards, the ones still on patrol somewhere, might catch wind of this. My guns weren't safe yet, not completely. I crouched, catching my breath, glancing down the alley. The night was silent again, but I knew better. This wasn't just about stolen guns anymore. This was about exposing a corrupt HOA, showing them that messing with a former cop, even one who's been retired, was a grave mistake. And then I saw it, a small glint of light moving across the street, heading toward my neighbor's house. Another guard, or worse, the HOA president himself. My gut told me it was trouble. And trouble, I knew, always came in the dead of night. I realized someone else was coming for my guns. I had 2 guards down, but a new threat appeared across the street. Who was it, and what was their plan? I froze for a split second, staring at the glint of light across the street. My gut told me this wasn't just curiosity, it was escalation. The adrenaline from tackling the guards still pulsed in my veins, but now I had a bigger problem. Whoever was out there clearly knew what had happened. My guns were valuable, yes, but apparently they were worth more than I imagined. I crouched behind the hedge, peeking out, trying to assess the situation without giving away my position. The figure moved deliberately, confident, with a swagger I immediately recognized. The HOA president, of course. Who else would personally get involved in a gun heist? He wasn't a fighter, he had never been, but arrogance, I knew, was a dangerous weapon. And he had plenty of it. I muttered under my breath, half laughing, half gritting my teeth. The big boss himself decides to show up. How Hollywood of him. But there was no time for jokes. He was heading straight for my garage, where 2 of his pawns were still groaning on the driveway. I quickly assessed my options. Charge him, call it in. No, too messy, too public. I needed control, my way, my rules. I moved silently, shadowing him as he approached, using the old cop trick of keeping obstacles between us while closing the distance. Every step he took, I was ready. He reached the garage and froze when he saw his 2 guards sprawled on the ground. His face went pale, probably the first time he'd seen consequences for anything in his life. He opened his mouth, likely to yell, but I cut him off. Looking for these, I said, holding one of the gun cases up. For a moment, silence. Then laughter, a mix of disbelief and anger, escaped his lips. You think you can just take them from me? This is HOA property, he barked, trying to sound authoritative, but it came out more desperate than commanding. I smirked, feeling the familiar rush of confidence. HOA property. Funny, I don't remember signing away my Second Amendment rights when I bought this house. He glanced at his guards, who were trying to stand but kept slipping and tripping over each other. I almost felt sorry for them, but then I remembered the adrenaline, the theft, the nerve. Nope, no mercy tonight. He tried to step forward, raising his hands as if to negotiate. Look, I can fix this, we can. I cut him off, pressing the flashlight under his chin, making him flinch. Fix this? You mean cover up the theft, intimidate me, and hope a retired cop doesn't notice? Sorry, buddy, that's not how this ends. And that's when things got interesting. The president's arrogance evaporated, replaced by panic. He pulled a phone from his pocket, likely to call for backup, but I had anticipated it. With a swift motion, I kicked the phone from his hand into the bushes. Need a better plan? I asked, voice low and steady, dangerous in its calm. He stepped back, fumbling. Sweat ran down his forehead. I could almost hear his mind racing. What could he do against someone who had literally lived in the shadows of danger for decades? Humor tried to slip in again. I muttered under my breath. Imagine thinking a clipboard and a couple of guards could outsmart me. Classic HOA overconfidence. Then came the moment of truth. He lunged, desperate, trying to grab one of the gun cases. I sidestepped, using his momentum to push him toward the wall. He stumbled, almost hitting his head on the garage door. Panic was painted all over his face. But the real twist, the backup he called for didn't show up immediately. Apparently, word traveled fast, but help was slow, or maybe nobody wanted to get involved with a former cop holding their boss accountable. Either way, that gave me a perfect opening. I grabbed the phone from the bushes, snapped a quick photo of him, and whispered, "Smile, HOA president. You're about to be famous in the court records." At that moment, one of his guards groaned, finally recovering enough to mutter something. And that's when I heard it, a faint rustling sound behind me. Another shadow, someone else had joined the chaos. I spun around just in time to see a figure step out of the darkness, silhouetted by the streetlights. My blood ran cold. Whoever this was, they weren't a guard, they were coming for the guns, and they weren't planning on negotiating. Everything I'd controlled so far, the chase, the confrontation, the evidence, was about to escalate to a level I hadn't expected. And I realized something important in that split second. I wasn't just fighting guards and a corrupt HOA president. I was stepping into a war, and the first battle was far from over. A mysterious figure appeared from the shadows, heading straight for my guns. Who were they, and how much danger were my guns, and I truly in? I barely had time to react before the shadow stepped closer. Whoever or whatever it was, they moved with purpose. My pulse surged. I had two guards groaning on the driveway, a panicked HOA president in my face, and now an unknown player entering the mix. This was about to get messy. I crouched, analyzing my options. Charging head-on was suicide. Waiting, risky. But I had something they didn't: experience, preparation, and a little creativity. Years as a cop had taught me one undeniable truth: control the environment, control the situation. And tonight, my environment was my weapon. I glanced at the garage, noticing the spare motion sensors I'd left rigged earlier. Perfect. I whispered under my breath, time to turn the night in my favor. I carefully triggered one of the sensors, a faint click audible only to me. A soft, sudden beam of light arced across the driveway. The figure froze. Good. Step 1, surprise. I edged closer, keeping low, my old tactical training kicking in. The unknown intruder paused, unsure what the light meant. Panic was a dangerous ally, and right now, I had it working for me. I grinned, nothing like watching a would-be thief hesitate. Meanwhile, the HOA president was scrambling, muttering something about calling the police. I ignored him, focusing on the new threat. My flashlight danced across the yard, picking up glimpses of the person's movements. Whoever they weren't expecting a retired cop to be orchestrating the scene like a chess master. I whispered under my breath, a mix of sarcasm and strategy. You're about to learn why you don't mess with someone who spent decades reading criminals like open books. The shadow made a sudden move toward the gun case. Perfect. That was the opening I needed. With a quick step, I intercepted them, shoving a shoulder into their chest, making them stumble. My adrenaline surged. This was exactly the kind of chaos I thrived in. But the person didn't go down easily. They twisted, trying to regain control of the case. I grabbed it with one hand, holding on like my life depended on it, because it did. And in a fluid motion, I tripped them using a subtle sweep I'd practiced hundreds of times. They crashed to the ground with a loud thud. I panted, adrenaline still pumping, heart hammering. Two guards were still sprawled in the driveway, the HOA president was frozen, and now this intruder was groaning on the pavement. It was chaos, and I was in control. For now. I glanced around, nodding my next moves. There was one more detail I hadn't anticipated: the president's face. He looked like someone had just handed him a script he didn't understand, desperation written in every line, arrogance gone. I couldn't resist a quip. Surprised? Don't worry, it's just a little HOA intervention. Then came the moment of reckoning. The intruder tried to scramble, reaching for something in their pocket. I froze. Was it a weapon? I had to act fast. With lightning reflexes, I grabbed their wrist and twisted it behind their back, forcing them to drop whatever they had. It was a small knife. Not much, but enough to make a mistake deadly. I cuffed them quickly, muttering under my breath about how HOA drama had taken a hard turn into felony territory. The irony wasn't lost on me. All I wanted was to catch the guards and the president, and somehow, I was now holding a knife-wielding intruder in my yard. The HOA president, seeing me handle the situation, finally realized something important. I wasn't bluffing. He stepped back, hands raised in surrender. "Wait, you can't do this," he stammered. I shook my head. "Oh, I can, and I will. You brought your guards into my driveway, tried to steal my guns, and now, thanks to your little plan, you've just made things a lot worse for yourself." I glanced at the two guards still on the ground. They were groaning, rubbing sore ribs, looking terrified. Perfect. Lesson learned, I thought. I had them exactly where I wanted. But the night wasn't over yet. A low sound caught my attention, a faint engine revving in the distance. My heart sank slightly. Back up. Another layer to this mess. I couldn't afford surprises, not now. I gritted my teeth, tightening my grip on the gun case. All right, I muttered under my breath. Time to finish this before it escalates any further, one step at a time. Control the scene, control the chaos. And then I realized something chilling. The HOA president had one last card to play. I didn't know what it was, but judging by the way he froze, fear and arrogance battling in his eyes, it was going to be big. I had the guards down, the intruder cuffed, and the gun case secured, but the HOA president just reached into his pocket. My stomach dropped. What was he planning, and could I stop it before it was too late? The HOA president's hand hovered over his pocket, and I felt a jolt of unease. My instincts screamed danger. He was about to make a move that could ruin everything. Years of experience had trained me to anticipate threats before they materialized. I wasn't about to let him catch me off guard. I tightened my grip on the gun case, keeping my body low and balanced. Careful, I muttered, my voice calm but edged with steel. One wrong move, and this night gets a lot messier for you. He smirked nervously, but the look in his eyes betrayed panic. For the first time, the man realized he was out of his depth. I could almost hear his thoughts. I underestimated him, big mistake. And then it happened. He whipped a small object from his pocket, a tiny smoke device, probably meant to cover his escape. I barely had a second to react. My years as a cop kicked in. I dove sideways, narrowly avoiding the puff of white smoke that hissed past my ear. The smell of burning chemicals filled the air. Nice try, I muttered under my breath as he stumbled back, coughing, trying to regain control. My advantage, anticipation. My former life had taught me to expect the unexpected, and I was ready for this. The guards, still recovering from my earlier takedown, scrambled to their feet. One tried to charge me, but I sidestepped, using his momentum to push him into the wall. The other tried to grab the intruder I had cuffed, but I grabbed a garden rake nearby and waved it like a weapon. Humor and strategy combined. Gentlemen, I wouldn't recommend that. The HOA president, still disoriented, tried to call for help again. I kicked the phone from his hand, sending it skittering across the driveway. At this point, I wasn't just fighting for my guns. I was controlling the entire chaotic scene. The adrenaline coursing through me made me sharper, faster, and more alert than I had been in years. I glanced at the gun case. It was mine, safe for now, but I knew better than to get complacent. There was still a threat lurking, the possibility that the president had more tricks up his sleeve. I muttered sarcastically, who knew HOA drama could turn into a full-on action movie? The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on me. Two guards groaning, one intruder cuffed, the president panicking, and me, a retired cop, orchestrating the chaos like a conductor leading a symphony. Then the unexpected happened. The president made a desperate lunge for the gate controls on his belt. That would have opened the exit and let him, or his backup, get away with my guns. I reacted instantly, sprinting toward him, tackling him into the hedge. Leaves and twigs flew everywhere as he struggled beneath me. Not tonight, I growled, pinning him down. The guards on the ground watched, wide-eyed, realizing they had no escape plan. I caught a fleeting glance of fear and regret on their faces. Finally, they understood. Messing with me wasn't a gamble, they had already lost. I pulled the gun case closer, checking its locks. Everything was intact. My guns were safe for the moment. But I knew the president wouldn't go down quietly. He was cornered, desperate, and dangerous, the perfect combination for an unpredictable finale. A siren wailed in the distance, faint but growing louder. Someone had called the police. Perhaps a neighbor, perhaps one of the panicked guards. Either way, reinforcements were on the way. I had to act fast to secure the scene and ensure no one walked away without facing consequences. I glanced at the president, who was now sputtering and gesturing wildly, probably trying to negotiate his way out. I shook my head, amused despite the tension. "You brought this on yourself," I said, voice steady, authoritative. "And now it's time to pay the price." As I secured the last guard with handcuffs, the president attempted a final escape, diving toward the driveway. I grabbed him just in time, twisting his arm behind his back and forcing him to the ground. His protests were muffled, his bluster gone. He was finally under control. I stood, taking a deep breath. The chaos of the night still hung in the air. Scattered leaves, overturned planters, groaning guards, and one very disgruntled HOA president pinned beneath my grip. But the important thing, my guns were safe. I allowed myself a small smirk, feeling the familiar rush of satisfaction. Years of training, decades of experience had led me to this moment. And yet, I knew the night wasn't completely over. There were still questions to answer, consequences to enforce, and perhaps a few surprises left in the shadows. The sirens grew louder. Police were approaching. But as I turned to secure the scene, I noticed the HOA president's eyes flick toward the street with a knowing, dangerous look. What was he planning next, and could this chaos spiral even further? The wail of sirens grew louder, echoing down the quiet suburban streets. I could see flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the garage doors and nearby windows. Reinforcements were arriving, but the chaos of the night had already shifted the balance of power. I was in control, and everyone else, HOA president, guards, intruder, knew it. I glanced down at the HOA president pinned beneath my grip. His smug arrogance had vanished, replaced with pure, desperate fear. I had a moment, just one, to make sure this corruption didn't slip through my fingers. Years on the force had taught me how to gather evidence and trap even the craftiest criminals, and tonight I was putting it all to use. "Smile," I muttered, snapping a photo of him with my phone. "This isn't going on Instagram, it's going straight to the police and the courts." He struggled, trying to speak, but his words were jumbled. "You don't understand, I can fix this," he wheezed. I shook my head. "You already proved you can't. You stole from me, manipulated your guards, and now, you're going to answer for it." I checked the two guards still groaning on the ground. They looked shell-shocked, like they'd just survived a hurricane, and in a way they had. Their plan had been simple: intimidate, steal, and walk away. Instead, they'd walked straight into a trap mine. The intruder I had cuffed struggled weakly. I leaned closer, whispering, "Tell me who sent you." And there it was, the final piece of the puzzle. Under pressure, the intruder spilled it all. The HOA president had personally orchestrated the theft to cover gambling debts, using his guards as pawns. Every stolen firearm, every attempted intimidation, they'd all been planned meticulously. Until me. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Justice wasn't just about catching criminals, it was about uncovering the full truth. And now I had it. The police finally arrived, skidding to a halt at the end of my driveway. Officers jumped out, guns drawn, surveying the chaotic scene. Leaves were strewn across the lawn, the hedge was torn up, and there I stood, calm, controlling the chaos like a conductor in the eye of a storm. I explained the situation quickly, handing over the evidence: video footage, photos, the cuffed intruder, and the two groaning guards. The officers' eyes widened as they took it all in. "You did all this alone?" one of them asked. I smirked. "Not alone, experience helps." The HOA president, still pinned on the ground, realized the gravity of his situation. No one was going to bail him out. No charm, no intimidation, nothing. I couldn't help but notice the irony. A man who had tried to manipulate the law for personal gain was now completely at its mercy. As the officers began taking statements and securing the guards, I finally allowed myself a breath. But my work wasn't finished. The HOA president had tried to ruin my property, steal my guns, and manipulate those around him. He needed to be exposed fully, not just arrested. I began recording a short video for the police, narrating everything: the guards' involvement, the president's personal orders, and the sequence of events that had led to this moment. My voice was calm, deliberate, and tinged with dark humor. "This is a cautionary tale," I said. "Never, ever underestimate a former cop, especially one who still remembers the tricks of the trade." The president, hearing me narrate the evidence, tried one last bluff. "You'll regret this," he yelled, voice cracking. I shook my head, not even fazed. "I don't think so. You should have thought of that before stealing from me and threatening my property." The police finally led him away, and I watched as he realized that tonight, the HOA hierarchy and his schemes had crumbled. The guards were also taken in for questioning, their role in the theft and intimidation fully documented. My guns, still secure in their cases, were finally back where they belonged. I finally took a step back, surveying the chaos one last time. The adrenaline had faded slightly, leaving a mix of relief and satisfaction. Humor crept back in. Who knew HOA drama could involve handcuffs, smoke bombs, and tactical takedowns? My neighbors probably think I started a small civil war tonight. But the best part, justice had been served, and I had proof. Everything, the corruption, the theft, the intimidation, was now documented beyond dispute. As I packed up my equipment and secured my property, I realized that tonight wasn't just about stopping a theft. It was about standing up to arrogance, corruption, and a system that sometimes thinks it's above the law. And I had done it, one calculated move at a time. As the HOA president was led away in handcuffs, I noticed him glance back at me with a look that promised he wasn't done scheming. Something told me this story wasn't over, not entirely. What else could he possibly try next? The HOA president's cuffs rattled as officers led him toward the squad car, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his glare held more than just defeat. It was the kind of glare that said, "This isn't over." I shook my head, muttering under my breath, "Buddy, you've already overplayed your hand." I glanced around the driveway, still littered with evidence of the night's chaos, scattered leaves, trampled hedges, and 2 guards still groaning in disbelief. My guns were safely back in their cases, locked and loaded, their shiny barrels glinting in the streetlights. I allowed myself a small, satisfied grin. Justice was sweet, and tonight it had a little extra flavor. The police officers were wrapping up statements, shaking their heads in disbelief. "I can't believe you handled all this alone," one said. I shrugged. "Let's just say, I have experience dealing with people who underestimate me." Humor crept into my tone. After all, surviving a night like this deserved a little levity. The intruder, still cuffed, was being taken away for questioning. Apparently, they weren't connected to any official agency. They'd just been desperate enough to take the president's orders at face value. The officers promised to follow up thoroughly, and I knew justice would catch up with them too. Once the chaos settled, I finally stepped back, breathing in the night air. It was quiet now, eerily quiet, but in a way that felt earned. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment. I had faced multiple threats, outsmarted a corrupt HOA president, and secured my property without firing a single shot. I glanced at the HOA president one last time as he was shoved into the police car. His expression had shifted from anger to disbelief, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of respect, or fear. Either way, the point was made. No one, not guards, not HOA presidents, messed with me and got away with it. I couldn't resist a final quip. "Good luck explaining this one to your board meeting," I muttered under my breath. The irony of an HOA president being arrested for theft and intimidation wasn't lost on me. This would go down in the neighborhood's history, that was for sure. After the police drove away, I returned to my house, locking the garage and checking the cases one last time. My guns were safe and my property was secure, but I knew the HOA wouldn't give up entirely. Corruption has a way of lingering, waiting for the right moment to resurface. That didn't scare me, not tonight. I had faced worse, and I had come out on top. I sank into my favorite chair on the porch, sipping a long-overdue cup of coffee. The night had been long, exhausting, and chaotic, but also satisfying in a way I hadn't felt in years. I allowed myself a small laugh, shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. Who knew HOA drama could turn into a tactical operation? I whispered to the empty yard. And then came the most satisfying part. The neighborhood would know. The president's schemes, the guards' blind loyalty, the attempted theft, it was all documented. I had footage, photos, statements. The law was on my side. For once, arrogance and corruption had met their match in the form of a retired cop who refused to be intimidated. I leaned back, feeling the weight of the night lift. Payback had been swift, precise, and dare I say entertaining. The HOA president had learned a lesson. Never underestimate someone who knows how to read threats, anticipate moves, and enforce justice in ways you can't predict. As dawn began to creep over the rooftops, painting the sky with soft pink and gold, I felt a sense of closure. The neighborhood would settle back into its usual routine, lawns mowed, mailboxes polished, but behind the scenes the balance had shifted. Power, respect, and consequences had been restored. I looked at my guns one last time, still gleaming in their cases. They weren't just property, they were proof. Proof that no one could intimidate me, that experience counts, and that sometimes justice needs a little extra muscle and a lot of brains. With a smirk and a shake of my head, I whispered into the morning air. Some HOA presidents just don't learn, but tonight, I made sure this one did. The neighborhood was quiet, the chaos behind me, and for the first time in hours I could relax. I had won. Not with anger, not with violence, but with patience, planning, and a little well-timed humor. And that, my friends, is how you survive and thrive when HOA corruption meets a former cop who refuses to back down. The guns are safe, the corrupt HOA president is exposed, and justice has been served. The neighborhood has returned to peace, but one thing is certain: mess with me and you'll regret it. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.